Right from the beginning, for all these reasons that we have outlined, Palestine was a creation, was an entity that violated the most fundamental norms of justice right from the beginning. Israel created in Palestine, right from the beginning, it was a violation of all the norms of justice. Now, after that massive pogrom of 1948, there were smaller groups of Palestinians who were expelled until what happened in 1967. So this massive war, the Six-Day War, and again, Palestinians lost out. The land that was still in their hands, about 22% of original Palestine, 22%, mind you, in 1967, it is also gone. It came under the authority, the power of Israel and groups connected with Israel. So if you look at it in terms of its history and its genesis, the UN, the international system, betrayed Palestine right from the beginning. Of course, it had to create Israel for reasons that we have talked about a while ago. But Palestine itself, which was also supposed to be a state established by the UN, but because of the injustice that was done to the Palestinians and other Arabs were opposed to this idea of a Palestinian state that was really meaningless because they were the bigger portion of the population, majority, but given a smaller portion. 60% of the population given 30% of the land called Palestine, while a smaller percentage, the Jews, were given the bigger portion of the Palestinian land. So that again, had happened at that time and it continued. And Arabs and Palestinians didn't accept this, but they were in no position to rebel against this idea. They were in no position to put this idea to an end. They couldn't. They were helpless. They were weak. The majority in the international system, including the majority of members of the UN, and we know at that time it was dominated by Western countries or those countries that were sympathetic to the West. Arabs and Palestinians and countries of the so-called third world didn't have much of a say. So that's the historical injustice that we should be concerned about. Talking about Palestine, and it continued. There have been other instances of Palestinians being marginalized, Palestinians being oppressed and suppressed, but it didn't change the situation. They could not ensure that there was any justice, even though the majority of members of the UN General Assembly by the 1970s were on the side of Palestine. They wanted Palestine, but they did not have real power. They had the numbers, but not the power by the 70s and right on, 80s, 90s, and so on. And that is the reality of the international system. You may have the numbers, but you don't have the power. You don't have the ability to change things. And Palestine was an outstanding example of this. The Palestinian people were victims. And Israel, the entity created by the UN, legitimized by the UN, was able to ride a roughshod over everyone else. Why? Not simply because of what the global system was. It is largely because the most powerful nation in the world at that time, perhaps even today, the United States of America was completely on the side of Israel. And they ensured that Israeli interests would dominate all the while, as far as the global system is concerned. So the US role is very important. Many of the other Western countries were sympathetic to Israel, including countries like Britain and Germany, and that has remained the reality. The US in the forefront of the backers of Israel and other European countries supporting Israel and accepting all the injustices that had happened. They did not feel that a terrible wrong had been done to the Palestinian people, even if some of them felt, some groups here and there, they did not feel motivated to try to change this situation. So that's the situation that we are confronted with up to this day. In terms of people supporting Palestine, it has grown. It's true. The numbers have grown, including many people in Europe and even in the United States of America. Those who support Palestine today, we are told, would be perhaps around 66% of the population of the United States of America, the idea of Palestine. And one of the reasons why the number has grown is because of the injustices done to the Palestinians, so obvious to people. And if you look at a recent example, what had happened in Gaza, that had increased Palestinian support for the cause of Palestine. Why? Because it was a terrible injustice. The way Palestinians were massacred, including young children, babies, the way they were killed, people had begun to see what this injustice was all about and what it was doing to people who were the legitimate owners of the land. Because, the Palestinians had been there for a long, long time. We are told that if you look at the history of Gaza, it's perhaps anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 years. And Gaza was a major center in the civilizational sense. It was involved in important economic activities. I often mention this, that if you look at even a thing like very important aspect of medicine and healthcare, the gauze, yeah, it is actually from Gaza. What we use in medical and health care, it's from Gaza. So it had a long history of civilization, but all that was set aside in order to preserve the interests of Israel. In terms of mass feelings, things are changing, but will it lead to the eventual establishment of a Palestinian state, a legitimate Palestinian state, sovereign, independent Palestinian state? We don't know. We don't know whether that will happen. But the obstacles, we know what they are. It's the United States and Israel. Many of the European countries have now come around to accepting the idea of a Palestinian state. But the United States and Israel, they are adamant in rejecting a Palestinian state. They're completely against it. And it is this position that has prevailed. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality. So if you're talking of global justice, the role of the UN, the role of other international institutions and mechanisms, and so on, Palestine is an outstanding example of an injustice. There have been other injustices, of course. You can say that if you look at, say, even Kashmir is an injustice. Kashmir was an issue that came under the purview of the UN right from 1947-48. But till today, we don't have an independent Palestinian state or a Palestinian state where the people have the say. In other words, the state is the product of the people's wishes. That doesn't exist in the case of Kashmir. And there are other examples. Generally, there's been no global justice. That's the reality. And the reason why there's no global justice is one wants to be cynical. Right from the beginning, after the Second World War, the institutions and mechanisms that were established were intended to perpetuate dominance and hegemony, not justice. Of course, the camouflage was, it's justice. One nation, one vote, democracy and all the rest of it. But in reality, it meant nothing, partly because we had the veto. And the veto, when it was first established, was the veto that was given to the United States and its allies. All the other four countries were allies of the US at that time, in 1945, including China and Russia. We were all allies, apart from Britain, France, and of course, US itself. So it was an institution, these were mechanisms that were established. We have not talked about others that strengthened this injustice. IMF, the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, all institutions that came up at that time, 44, 45, after 1945 and so on, they were all intended to, the purpose was to perpetuate hegemony and dominance of the powerful, the United States in particular, and its allies. So it is in a sense naive of us to expect the global system to deliver justice. It was never meant to deliver justice. Its real purpose was to perpetuate dominance, hegemony. The purpose is not democracy, the purpose is not justice. Remember that. We have to understand that all the while. So we are not surprised at what has happened all these years. And if anything is going to change this situation, it would be the mass consciousness of people, perhaps. But how will it express itself? How will it bring about a change? We don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. And more than that, perhaps it will struggle for this change. We have to speak, write, campaign, network, mobilize, do all that is necessary to bring about a change. But as it is, the situation doesn't look hopeful, but the need for a struggle is obvious. One has to continue to commit oneself to that struggle, because the injustice done to Palestine is one of the greatest injustices in human history. From whatever angle you look at it, one of the greatest injustices done to any people in history. And it's still there with us. It is a burden that all of us carry. And those of us who are conscious, we will continue to speak up, organize, mobilize. But what will be the eventual outcome, whether it will lead to a victory, we don't know. But this is what struggle means. And the greatest injustice is actually the global system itself. It is against the most basic fundamental justice that you would expect. You recognize the rights of a people and you give them a dignity that is theirs. But you don't do that. What you have is a situation where dominance, control, power in its raw form is manifested all the while, and others become victims. Let us hope that we can change this. Thank you.